Awesome. So, Mark, thank you for having me here at your office downtown.
Great to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Lloyd's Canada. So this is a first, and it's quite the operation you guys have here. What's the guy behind you, the red guy? What do we call him?
He's a waiter. He is famous. Hundreds of years of history there. Lloyd's has, ever since it's had, I guess, a formal office and moved out of the coffee shop, they've had waiters to help greet our guests and keep things orderly. So we brought a little bit of London back to Toronto with us.
I love it. And we tried to get a camera angle where we could actually fit him in here. And it kind of feels like we're in the Lloyd's of London building with this backdrop. So
it's a unique place, right? The underwriting room at Lloyd's in London. So so it seems apropos to have it, at least a picture of it at our offices.
I'll have to get away from home. I'm sure it's an experience. Have you been there a few times?
I get there regularly, and it is every time, right? It's an amazing thing. You can feel the energy on the floor, which is, part of the reason that post-COVID, we wanted to get people back. I mean, it is one of the truly unique aspects of Lloyd's that there's that much insurance being negotiated face-to-face, real time, right? An exchange of information and risk appetites and new ideas that's unparalleled anywhere else.
Yeah. And you think about and I don't want to take for granted that everybody in the audience knows the Lloyd's of London story. I still remember when I got into insurance doing principles and practices of insurance. It was the first CIP course that everybody had to take. And we learned about Lloyd's and just kind of hearing the origin, it was a coffee house.
It absolutely was at the foot of the docks of London, right?
Yeah.
And it's how mariners and ship charters started sharing risk and making, overseas trade possible.
Yeah. And the irony of we've got our Lloyd's coffee here. It's in a Lloyd's mug, but there's something else inside. It is coffee. But it's just ironic because being, InsurTech Canada, we deal with a lot of founders, a lot of startups. And when you're in that startup kind of bootstrappy world where you don't have a lot of capital, oftentimes the office is a coffee shop.
Sure.
And I just thought it was ironic, the connection to Lloyd's, this massive behemoth in the industry, the Lloyd's marketplace, very unique, almost like a birthing place of modern insurance, but it all started in a coffee shop. So for those startups out there,
we
never know. Right?
We work to stay close to our roots, and we'll talk about that obviously, but the Lloyd's Lab is about making sure that at 350 years old, Lloyd still thinks like a startup, at least in some respects, right? It still tries to reinvigorate and re-energize with new ideas, new technologies, all of that.
It's very fitting, actually, because I think on its face, people might be intimidated by the Lloyd's brand and look at it and go how can I, as a startup, a founder-led startup where you're wearing 5 different hats and you might have handful of contractors, maybe 1 or 2 full-time or part-time employees, a hybrid. How can a company the size of Lloyd's help me and relate to me? But it's really in your DNA.
I'd like to think so. I mean, it can be complicated at first to understand, but remember, Lloyd's isn't a single thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a marketplace full of much smaller operating entities, full of syndicates, managing agents, of Lloyd's brokers, cover holders all around the world that help distribute our products.
Right.
So, the sum of the whole is pretty significant. But at an operating level, you don't have to be a giant to engage and deal with Lloyd's.
Yeah, which is really refreshing to hear. And as a marketplace, bringing, if you go back to the original kind of vision or how Lloyd's came to be, bringing underwriters together, people that had valuable cargo and voyages, and they needed somebody to underwrite that risk, maybe share in some of the proceeds of the profits. Lloyd's role was to bring all those stakeholders together and find underwriters. And I think the term underwriter actually came from that model too.
Right. Yeah.
So just kind of look at the parallel between what we're trying to do at InsurTech Canada. We're, I guess, a marketplace type community as well, where our mission is to bring founders, carriers, brokers, MGAs, folks like Lloyd's together into one place to innovate for the sake of advancing the industry.
Absolutely.
The insurance industry in Canada. So I just see a lot of connection points there, and I was brushing up on my Lloyd's history. So it just really validated that this was going to be a great conversation. I'm excited, Mark, about your involvement in like supporting the community, and we're going to be doing some meetups. And I know you've volunteered your time to be involved. So.
Absolutely. I mean, you've just set the stage pretty high for our listeners. So I hope I have something interesting to say in the next little while. But I'm excited personally. Lloyd's is always excited to engage, notwithstanding the history and the expertise. We're never too knowledgeable or too important not to engage. That's how you improve, how you get better, and how you stay relevant. So absolutely.
Well said. Well said. So a bit about you. How did you get your start in insurance? I know you spent some time doing a few different things, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So
No. I mean,
how would you tell the story?
It's not unlike many people's story where it wasn't sort of a direct line, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't talking about it with my mom and dad as I was growing up, but if you scratch the surface enough, you find an old recovering lawyer in me. And I got into insurance through the practice of law. And I was a lawyer working in the banking segment. And, I made the transition over one day to become a lawyer working in the insurance segment. And then, through different events and a little bit of hard work, my role kind of evolved and changed out of strictly legal and into more of a business role. And it's continued to evolve ever since then.
Very cool.
One day I'll land on something that I'm actually good at, but until then, it keeps on evolving.
That's great. Do you find yourself kind of tempted to kind of fall back into that lawyer role?
Yeah, it's interesting. I never sort of asked to leave. I was it was a sort of a field promotion, I guess is the way to call it at the time.
Yeah.
So it's not that I was a disgruntled lawyer looking for a way out. So I don't want to go back, but it kind of gets in your DNA, right? And so it doesn't really matter even today when faced with a problem or a complex issue. The way of thinking kicks back in like an old lawyer.
For sure.
So it's
like riding a bike, right?
Yeah, right. So I think of it as recovering, right? Because it's a day-by-day challenge.
It's like a 12-step program. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So speaking of riding bikes, what does Mark like to do outside of the walls of Lloyd's?
I'm not all that fascinating. I have a very busy family with 2 children, with a son who's 16 and a daughter 13. So I'd say a lot of time and energy gets focused on, whatever they're up to.
Yep.
I'm doing a lot of vicarious living these days through them, along with a lot of shuttling and driving. And other than that, I mean, we, because my wife also has a very busy and demanding career, we value like family time. We value trying to get away on a couple of vacations throughout the year and stuff. It's all pretty normal stuff, really. Right?
Yeah. I got some teenagers at home too.
There you go.
Maybe we can have a counseling session after this.
Trade a support group, InsurTech support group for parents.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's a few of us out there. So that's great to hear. And do you ever wonder if your kids will get into the insurance industry, or do they talk?
They don't yet. I think they're still a little young to really be thinking about that. My son starts to talk about law now and then, and I shudder a little bit. But I would encourage it, right? Like I sincerely believe it's a great industry. It affords tremendous careers, and I absolutely and firmly believe it should and does serve a higher social purpose.
Absolutely, it does. And that's not always obvious on its face, because people love to hate politicians. They love to hate banks and insurance companies, right? So it's not always the thing you like to admit. It's not
entirely undeserved, right? I mean, we could do a much better job. And, I've had insurance claims recently too, and can't say I love my customer service that I received, right? Notwithstanding that, we should always be striving to do better. There are amazing stories out there every day about the industry stepping up, about the industry engaging with governments and other stakeholders around planning, around improving resiliency, but trying to lead the dialogue around sustainability, transition to net zero. I mean, there's just, you can go on and on, right? There's a lot of good that we do. And if people don't know it, then shame on us for not talking about it enough.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I always say insurance is a people business, but it's also a business of trust. And you're giving an organization premium indefinitely, and then with the hope that they'll come through on the promise.
Right. Well, you're buying a promise, right? You're buying a promise to be there when you need them, and it's a hard promise to live up to, too, right? Yeah. I think in all fairness, and I'm not trying to advocate blindly on behalf of the industry, but you kind of deal with people in their greatest time of need and distress when they're probably not at their most patient. Yeah. And listen, that's okay. That's what we get paid for.
Yeah. I will say plug for the industry, and 20 years went by like that. I got in 2002 and started my first job in claims. Somehow I found myself in the field in leadership positions, doing all sorts of things, running branches. But the most rewarding, I would say, part of my career in insurance was the claims part. Mm-hmm. And I remember in 2013, and I was in a leadership role this time. I was out of the field. But in 2013, Calgary and Southern Alberta was hit by floods. And it was an all hands on deck situation. And we were small enough as a carrier that we didn't have, we ran pretty lean. So it was like, if you know how to adjust a field claim, you're going.
Right.
And so out we went, and, being there for people in their time of need. And it sounds a little cliche and maybe a little cheesy, but there were times where we were crying with policyholders, and actually people were hugging us as we're handing over a check. For their sewer backup limit, which in a lot of cases didn't even cover the full loss. But you saw the impact right there, and you're involved in a situation like that. You don't get any closer to the impact that insurance has on society, and when that promise is fulfilled. And it feels great, actually, that when you can deliver on that promise and you're exceeding the customer's expectations. And I've argued with family members and friends who don't understand insurance, and they like to kind of love to hate insurance because of maybe some ignorance or one bad experience they heard. But in all the years I spent in claims, 99.9% of the claims are paid. Right. Insurance companies, despite some popular belief and some myth that's out there, they want to pay claims. And
I think that's the case. I mean, that's what we sell, right? It doesn't make sense if you never paid claims, then I don't think anyone would be buying the product. But now that we've both sort of self-declared our love for the industry.
Now let's speed it up.
There's still a lot of improvement. There's still a lot of space to be better, right? And so that's what we strive for. And looking around at how new technology and new ideas can help traditional carriers improve, that's why there's the interest there, right?
And perfect segue into Lloyd's Labs. So, another reason for our existence is to advance the cause for innovation and insurance. And technology is one tool to do that. It's not all about technology. But can you help us unpack, what is it that Lloyd's Labs is doing, and why are they even involved?
Right. Yeah. So absolutely. Right. So Lloyd's Labs, the Lloyd's Lab was created as, part of, not exclusively part of Lloyd's focused on innovation and remaining relevant and leveraging all of the best ideas that are out there. Because Lloyd's is a marketplace, and there's 80 syndicates and 55 managing agents and hundreds of Lloyd's brokers, it was thought that we could really bring together the power of, instead of everyone trying to do it on their own, and still many do, using the Lloyd's Lab as sort of a lightning point for the entire market to galvanize around the idea of innovation seemed to make a lot of sense. And there was a lot of support from managing agents and underwriters within Lloyd's to do that. All right. And of course, ultimately they fund all of our work. So, but for their generosity and support, it wouldn't exist. But so the lab is now about 5 years old. In that time, we've run typically, and at the beginning was a little different, but typically we've averaged out to run about 2 cohorts per year.
Okay.
So that's about an 8 to 10 week stint. Where we invite insurtechs into the lab, right? And they get mentored, and they don't just get, one or two mentors. They typically have somewhere between 10 and 15 mentors per InsurTech, through a spectrum of Lloyd's corporate mentors, of different mentors from the underwriting side, from claims, Lloyd's brokers. They get sort of a full gambit of opinion and advice to help them. And it's highly valuable. And they go through, they refine their business idea, their pitch, their venture over that period. At the end of the sprint, there's sort of a pitch day where they kind of represent their improved and revised business plan. And the market turns up in the hundreds to listen to that, and deals get done that day, right?
Crazy.
Capacity is underwritten that day. If the entrant is an MGA or wants to become an MGA, investment and capital gets transacted that day. And just, connections are made within the marketplace that last for a really long time. And we hoped that it would be successful, that there'd be interest and utility to all of it all. But, the facts around it have been very, very encouraging. So like I said, in the 5 years, we've had about, I'd say, 1,600 different InsurTechs or other business ventures apply to go through the lab.
Wow.
Of that, about 200 were picked to come and formally pitch their idea to become entrants, to be accepted in, right?
Right.
And so we've done 100 now have passed through the lab, 100 different InsurTechs.
Wow.
I'm about to start another cohort actually in a month or two's time. But for those that have actually gone through, the statistics are really encouraging, more so than some other kind of incubators. 95% of the graduates are still in business. 70% are still engaged with Lloyd's in one way or the other, right? In a commercial way. Collectively, they've raised over $1.2 billion in capital, right?
Wow.
I think over 26 different graduates are now MGAs, right? With Lloyd's capacity, engaging in insurance around the world. And it is truly global, right? I would say, obviously, a majority of the companies that go through are either from the UK or the United States. But you have, we've had 3 or 4 from Canada. You get them from continental Europe, from Asia. Israel's had a fair number, right? With the tech community.
They've got a vibrant community,
right?
There.
So it's really global, which is great to see. It brings a huge diversity of thought and ideas. I think the lab's very beneficial for them, and it's mutual, right? Because Lloyd's, the entire marketplace, benefits from the program. So we're very high on it. Lots of plans to continue and improve the whole program. But it's been great.
It's incredible. That pitch for Lloyd's Labs is you convinced me of the value. And I'm not just saying that because one of the questions I was going to ask you is there value in going to London and doing all of that versus I could just apply to an incubator program locally?
Right.
And you kind of answered that question.
The access to, so to be highlighted and have unlimited, unparalleled access to the largest insurance marketplace in the world is the difference. So you decide whether it's worthwhile or not, right? You don't have to be there in person for the whole time, right?
Whole 10 weeks,
they are tech-focused people, right? They can do a lot of it virtually. You're encouraged to be there for certain critical dates and to get the most out of the experience because, part of it is kind of being in the lab, working shoulder to shoulder with the other 10 successful companies, right? And there is I think a rich sharing of ideas and collaboration to improve everyone's sort of business proposition. So, there's great value, I think, to if you're insurance focused and that's what you want to do, then I think it works well.
Yeah. And, there's those little things. And I think a lot of this got lost over the last 3 years. And this kind of Zoom culture we're living in now is those accidental conversations where you might, talk to somebody spontaneously and share an idea with maybe another tech startup that's in the Lloyd's Lab program, or even just to speak to an underwriter or just any of those things that happen organically you're not going to get if you're not there in person.
Right. And then there's also, there's a whole alumni community that now has been built, right?
Yeah.
That we keep on trying to engage with. We keep on trying to involve and work with. We use them as ambassadors going forward to help us, to encourage others to apply. So, I think, I'm sure there's lots of other great programs around.
Yeah.
I can only speak to the Lloyd's program, and we're pretty proud of it.
Yeah, well, it's unique, that's for sure. Like I can't see anyone really replicating that experience. So, and shout out to the Canadians who are listening to this. Apply. There's another cohort in September. They just closed applications, I think in February.
Yeah. We're sort of down now, I think, to basically to the number they're going to be invited to pitch to get in now, right? So I think they've gone down to 20-25 different potential candidates. And absolutely right. If anyone, it's all on the Lloyd's website. It's all very transparent. Yeah. But if anyone has questions, I'd encourage them always to reach out and talk to me. Happy to always enter into those conversations.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark, for representing that. Now, to kind of, again, switch gears again here, we talked about a few different things like the role of insurance in society. And we touched on that a little bit in the intro. But also I'm kind of curious to get some more of your thoughts around just like the role of technology in insurance.
Sure.
And in particular, AI is a big one.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of become a bit of a dirty word or a dirty term in the sense because insurance is such a people-centric business. So, how do you guys approach that? Where is the proper place for AI in insurance, maybe in underwriting or claims?
I think, I'm sure it's a dirty word. Like many new ideas, technologies, I think there's a bit of overhype about things, right? Yeah. A bit of an overhype.
Yeah.
And people kind of take time to shoot it down and it kind of lands more squarely where it ought to fit. And I am by no means a technology expert. I couldn't tell you the first thing technically about AI, but when I look at it and how it's sold to me, and I look across sort of the insurance business, I look for questions that are fairly simple to answer, right? That have to be answered very many times, repetitive, similar questions get answered many, many times that aren't too complicated. And I think that's a great application for AI.
Right. Yeah. More straight through type processing type things.
Well, it can be, right? It can be attached to straight through processing. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. But just, if I have to answer the same question over and over and over again as part of my business, whether it's on the claim side, on the underwriting, wherever it might be, then I think, hey, that sounds to me like an application for artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Right. And we have a live example for Lloyd's in Canada. You and I talked about, right? So there's different ways, obviously, that Lloyd's sells its policy to policyholders. One of the ways through the open market, right, where the deals literally get done on the underwriting floor. And when those policies are underwritten and bound for Canadian clients, as part of Canadian regulatory process, under Part 13 of the Insurance Companies Act, we have to be clear to our policyholders about whether the policy that they're obtaining is actually being underwritten by a licensed, a registered carrier in Canada, or whether it's foreign. And it can be either. There isn't a prohibition, but policyholders have to know which it is.
There has to be disclosure.
Right, because, one would argue that if it's from a registered insurer, that means it's under the supervision of Canadian insurance regulators, that the carrier is putting capital aside in Canada in trust to pay claims as and when they come due, that there is a inference that registered insurance is somehow better for Canadian policyholders than non-registered. So back to the policy that gets bound all the way in London in the underwriting room. Is that registered insurance or isn't it?
Yeah.
And, according to an advisory that was issued as part of Part 13 in the Insurance Companies Act, there's a set of indicia that you have to kind of qualify for like 2 out of the 9 indicia. And if you do that, then you've got registered insurance.
Got it.
So that's a question that gets answered on average 200 times a day on the underwriting room. 200 policies for Canadian policyholders on average get bound every single day. And, before we had AI to kind of answer that question.
Yeah.
We didn't do it on a policyholder level. We did like an audit sample
Sure.
and kind of extrapolated,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, with a little bit of AI and building some automation around it, now every time a policy for a Canadian policyholder gets bound in the open market, it gets fed into that machine overnight, and by the next morning we know, for 90% of the policies whether they're going to qualify or not, and the 10% that we don't know, we ask a human to take a second look at.
Which makes sense. I think that's just putting things in their proper place,
right,
and getting like the mundane, low value. And I overusing the term straight through, but you want to keep the complex decisioning to someone that has that experience.
I want to, I agree. Yeah. I guess I would flip and say I want to use our most valuable asset, which is our people, for the most value added work, right? And I think,
well put.
They're going to make. When they're not making those decisions, they can make more important decisions.
Right. Right.
And as AI gets better, it'll keep on making, slightly more and more complex decisions, and we'll keep on redeploying our smartest brains, which are humans, to the other decisions.
What's interesting? You just triggered something inside of me. Is I have a bit of a Lean Six Sigma background, so the black belt in me comes out every now and then, and there's the whole concept of value add versus non-value add, and then business value add. Insurance is famous for putting everything in the business value add because that's just the regulatory excuse. But it makes me wonder, I'm curious over time if we can get to a place where the AI is so advanced. Yeah, so it's doing the lower value stuff and reserving the higher value decisioning for humans. But it would be great if the AI could identify when something becomes non-value add. It's like, okay, you've basically delegated this task to AI because you think it's a low value task. And it would be great if the AI could come back to you and say, actually, we don't need to ask this question 200 times. Like we need to just this is actually pure waste, right? And I can't think of an example right now, but it would be fantastic if we could get to that level of efficiency. And I think that is the proper place for it. So is there a name for this process?
Well, it's
a product, or is it just an internal process that you guys use?
Well, we had a vendor help us develop that. It's the process is the attorney in fact signing process, right? Okay. That's I guess what our regulatory and marketing name is for it. Okay. But it uses what I'm told is some fairly basic OCR kind of technology, document scan and read, and that gets fed into the AI, and it measures certain fields against the 9 criteria, the rules, so I think it fits perfectly, right? It's a highly repetitive decision that's not overly complicated, and now we have absolute certainty, with the same decision making for every single policy, as opposed to having 3 people doing it and they look at it slightly differently, right?
Right.
And we have sort of 100% validation.
Yeah.
So it's a great application. Hasn't changed the world, but it's made my job signing those policies a lot easier, and I have a lot more comfort about my name being on the policy or not because of that.
Yeah. I'm sure reduces errors significantly. What about was there a product by the name of Kai that you
Key, right? So it's actually a syndicate.
Okay.
Right? So this is arguably a much more complex use of AI, but Brit, which is sort of one of the largest well-known syndicates within Lloyd's, it started up Key in collaboration with Google Cloud.
Okay.
And what Key is a purely kind of algorithmic based underwriting venture where it's follow only, right? So at Lloyd's we have subscription policies, and there's always a lead underwriter, a lead market, right? That will like the largest percentage, and then the rest follow.
They're below the line, the other ones that
follow. Well, they all take a share, but everyone else has a smaller share than the lead,
like
right?
And
so the lead is assumed, I guess, to be arguably the most knowledgeable underwriter on that kind of particular risk. Right. You would think. See, that's always the case, but that's how it's supposed to work, right? So what Key says is, look, we're not going to lead because we're not that smart yet, but we're smart enough to follow and make decisions without humans, purely using AI on whether we should take a follow position on certain kinds of risk. Right?
Yeah.
So I think, they would have just celebrated, I guess, their second anniversary.
Is it spelled KI?
Yes.
Did I get that wrong?
KI. Yeah. Key. And, they've been having some significant success. They've grown their line size. I mean, the amount of insurance they're actually permitted to underwrite has grown significantly. I believe this year they've made an underwriting profit, but I think they're doing very well.
Yeah, that might be a segment that's worth going deeper on.
Yeah, so it's an interesting concept, a little bit polarizing, right, for some people in the market, right? Because they're saying, well, if everyone developed that, then there'd be no leads, right? Like it's one thing to stand there and make the big decisions. Another thing to follow someone else's decision. I mean, to be very honest, there's markets that don't use AI that have just been following other lead markets for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
If it's
they just
good enough for John, then I'll write it too.
Yeah, right.
And that's not the way it's supposed to be done. But it's interesting what Key's exploring and what they're doing, right? And it's very much in line with a lot of the principles and goals that Lloyd's is driving towards with straight through processing, right? With automation in all the right places to remove transactional friction, to lower the cost of individual transactions, to improve efficiencies and all of the things that, a large marketplace with a lack of consistency just because of the number of desperate parties,
right?
What we're trying to do to get to a more consistent approach, right?
To
common data standards, even, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the benefits of AI in insurance is consistent, repeatable results, which is good for the whole industry.
Absolutely.
Right. And we need more of that. Less variation, obviously. Speaking of results and underwriting profit, let's talk a little bit about Lloyd's results.
Sure.
So we're in March right now. I understand you guys have a decent loss ratio right now. It's
the official global results will be released. It's still, I think, a couple of weeks away, but today, Lloyd's did sort of make issue a press release, I guess, because the news is so good, and I presume it was about to get out. So they've released a combined operating ratio for the Lloyd's market entirely globally for 2022. It's, I think, a 91.9. So really a pretty extraordinary underwriting result.
Wow. Yeah.
When you think about where the market was just a couple of years ago, it's taken a lot of hard work from a number of people to get there. So, extremely proud about that. That comes along with, I believe it's but 19% top line growth. Now, of that, it kind of breaks down. I think 8% of that 19 is really from foreign exchange movements, right? 2022 was an interesting year.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of take that with a bit of a grain of salt, but pretty extraordinary results all the way around.
Yeah.
And more locally, I'm also pleased we filed the statutory results for Lloyd's on an aggregate basis within Canada just a week or so ago.
Okay.
And similarly, right? Strong growth, 14% top line. For the first time on the aggregate, Lloyd's has sort of pushed through the 6 billion premium mark. So we ended 2022 at about 6.1 billion in gross or net written premium in Canada.
Significant.
Yeah. And all with strong underwriting results, which is important. I mean, it's important really because it means that capacity should be consistent and predictable for our partners, right? And for all of the brokers we deal with our cover holders who have delegated authority from London, they can anticipate smooth renewals on all of that because we're in a good place, because the business is now operating at a sustainable level.
What would you? A couple things come out of that. But what would you attribute? Are there maybe 2 or 3 things like that you would attribute to the strong results that Canada's delivering, or just Lloyd's globally?
Well, I think the global effort permeates to Canada, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything secret about it. I mean, it was a good 3 years of very hard work, difficult conversations, right? Really moving the market. It had been
in a hard market.
Well, into a hard market, right? Like really transitioning, finally sort of kind of waking up and transitioning from, a 10, 12 year long soft market into something else.
And some brokers had never seen a hard
There's
market,
a whole generation
right?
of underwriters and brokers that had never seen it, right?
Mhm.
And so, which means that, everyone needed a lot more coaching and needed a lot of communication, which was also a challenge during a global pandemic as well.
Right.
Right. So, I don't pretend that it was all easy and smooth, but it was sort of what was required, at least in Lloyd's perspective, to continue to be a long-term predictable supplier of capacity. So I think, with lots of hard work from a number of people, from people inside the corporation of Lloyd's, from all of the markets that make up Lloyd's, they were able to get there. There is still pockets of work to be done, right?
Yeah.
It's the kind of task that never finishes, but hopefully it becomes more about monitoring and fine tuning as opposed to having to do a whole overhaul of the way the market underwrites and transacts business.
How any predictions on how long you think the hard market? Is it going to be a 3-year cycle textbook, or do you think we're in?
I think we're kind of past 3 years, to be honest. I think we're already past that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's. So you said, some people have never seen a hard market. I just caught the tail end of one, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's still legs, right? I think, inflation hasn't gone away. It's still running very high.
And interest rates are still going up.
And the numbers that you see on the news are core inflation rate. I mean, I think loss cost inflation are higher than that. Frankly, right?
Yeah.
The kind of things that we have to repair and replace, I think it's more than a 6% inflation. I think you still have social inflation coming out of the courts, right?
Yeah.
And class action suits and kind of all of that. So I think there's still quite a bit of legs. And then, then if insurers needed more motivation or impetus, I think they're getting squeezed pretty heavily at the back end based on reinsurance renewals from January 1.
Right.
And, the kind of the news is already out there in the trade publications that, April renewals, which is another big date in Japan and some other markets, they're preparing for continued pressure on reinsurance renewals.
Right.
So, I think some of the core components that have led to the hard market don't seem to be easing too much yet. Now, having said that, if you read what some of the global brokerages and things who do sort of compile the statistics around pricing, it would seem that pricing increases are moderating or slowing, but we're still talking about price increases.
Yeah.
Across
just not
many
as acute, maybe.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. At $6 billion net written premium, where would Canada rank?
Canada is Lloyd's second largest global market, right?
Wow,
So
I'm surprised by that. Actually.
The United States is kind of a behemoth and stands there, but other than the U.S., Canada is by a shot the second largest. We're comparable in size to all of Latin America and the Caribbean. We're comparable in size actually to continental Europe now.
Wow.
Which is I think. It's great, but why it's important is because, once you get to sort of that critical size, now you have syndicates back in London who have underwriters just focused on Canadian risks because there's scale there, right? So now they're becoming absolute experts in underwriting Canadian risk. And you have Lloyd's brokers who have service desks dedicated to Canada, right?
Yeah.
So you're building a whole bench of Canadian expertise in London that should only help to perpetuate better results.
Yeah.
That increases capacity. You
Yeah.
get this sort of virtuous circle going, right?
Right. It's like a flywheel almost.
Exactly. Right. So that, that's sort of my goal, is try and help facilitate that and make sure that, capacity keeps on getting deployed to Canada, because Canada continues to be a desirable underwriting environment for Lloyd's to transact business in.
Is there, what would you say is like the main focus for Lloyd's, like over the next 3 years? Is there something in particular? Oh, sorry, Lloyd's Canada specifically.
Yeah. Well, we have a whole bunch of goals, to be honest with you, right? I think, because of the hard work we've done and where the market sits now in a much more healthy place, we're starting to think about some really interesting new kind of commercial ventures for Lloyd's, right? We're starting to develop things like a captive proposition for Lloyd's.
Okay.
We're starting to think about Lloyd's as a multinational platform for customers and for other carriers to use, right? And, so one of there's a number, but, some of the great advantages of Lloyd's is the global licensing platform that we have, right?
Yeah.
Is the financial strength ratings that the marketplace enjoys, right? The ability to fairly easily invest capital into Lloyd's for relatively short investment horizons, for as short as 3 years.
Yeah.
So we're looking to try and create as many access points into Lloyd's for those who are interested in the insurance business as possible, whether it's as capital providers, whether it's as underwriters, whether it's as insurtechs, right?
Right.
We want Lloyd's to continue to be seen as the place to be.
Yeah, that's great. I think, it's been your position to lead, and I think it's great that an organization as old as Lloyd's is still innovating. Like that's really encouraging to see, because you don't always see that.
We're trying, industry. Right? Yeah. I mean, you have to.
Over perfection, right?
Right, right.
But so does Lloyd's or do you have a position on blockchain at all? Is that something you guys are looking at? And, you mentioned the word captive, so that kind of triggered. How does that all? Fit into
blockchain specifically.
Blockchain
I haven't seen too many blockchain focused insurtechs of late, to be honest. Again, I think for the right problem, blockchain makes a lot of sense as a solution, right?
Complex risk,
right.
International.
It's a pretty interesting technology that really hasn't found its sort of killer use case yet.
That's very well put,
right? Because it needs to have its sort of shining success for people, I think, to really think more seriously about it right now. I remember, to be honest with you, a couple of years ago, talking a lot more about it.
It's kind of fizzled out,
and it's not for lack of some of the ideas I heard that were really good, right? It seemed like a great technology for cross collaboration across the industry on things like anti-fraud.
Sure.
A whole
secure,
host,
fast,
right? A whole host of things that could be done with it. But the truth is, I haven't seen a lot of real tangible progress.
I think Allianz did something. I might be going back 4 or 5 years ago with blockchain. Captive backed blockchain backed captives, and really didn't see anything big in the market since then, but yet to be seen. I'd love to actually maybe have a roundtable discussion around that for another day with maybe a few other people in the industry. Challenges. We talked about like the focus of Lloyd's in Canada, internationally, your great results. You've been in the seat, the driver's seat for Canada. How
2.5 years? Yeah. It was June 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic.
Great time to start. Yeah.
We were joking around, actually, some of us just a couple of days ago, saying I saw one of my colleagues the first day because they dropped a cardboard box, a big box at my front door with my computer, a couple of Lloyd's coffee mugs and some notepads. And it wasn't until 7 months later that I got to see them in person again.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And then I think that was the life a lot of people were living. Yeah. So it was an interesting way to onboard, but it's been about 2.5 years now. And haven't looked back. It's really a remarkable place to work and be part of every
I feel
day.
that even just being here and interacting with the people. There's a whole group of people behind here that have an office. We're just against one part of the office. But in the 2.5 years, what would you say has been the biggest challenge that you've faced that maybe was unexpected?
That's an interesting question.
Maybe other than that's
right? Sort of that's kind of like an easy answer, right?
Yeah.
I nothing comes to mind immediately that that was really kind of earth-shaking for me. I would say that I came to Lloyd's thinking I understood how the market works and and the moving parts.
Very honest
answer. It was a huge learning curve, and there's still corners of it that I could learn and understand better for sure.
Yeah.
To work through all the minutiae, it can be quite a complicated place. It all works well.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't have to go all the way down into every rabbit hole in order to transact.
You just can't. Yeah.
But it's a fascinating place, right? And it's interesting how how the history and the tradition blends with sort of the new and the modern, right? How 1 minute you're talking about blockchain and AI at Lloyd's. And the next thing, you're like, why do we do this? Well, because 250 years ago, someone decided it was the right way, right? Or that's what the Lloyd's Charter says that we would undertake to do.
Sure.
And that charter hasn't changed. So that's fascinating.
I think it's fantastic. I'm a bit of a traditionalist myself. This is just personally on a personal level, but I think there's a lot of wisdom that came before us. And, despite this age of innovation, and we're at such a rapid pace now, like things happen in 3 years that used to take 30 years. We shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? So like it's holding on. I love that, how you said it. And I'm going to misquote you now, but the blend of history and tradition and taking that with innovation and having both of those things kind of commingled, I think is fantastic, because you can go one extreme or the other. And one of my favorite sayings is both and, not either or.
Right. That's great.
Which I think is a great example of that. So you just walked right into that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
It was not rehearsed.
No, it wasn't at all. So as far as just Lloyd's itself, kind of wrapping up closing thoughts. What do you want, especially Lloyd's Canada, the seat that you sit in here as the leader of the Canadian market, second largest market in the world for Lloyd's? What do you want Lloyd's to be known for when you talk to your cover holders, underwriters, MGAs, brokers?
So first of all, I want Lloyd's to continue to work at being an easier place to do business, right? It's still a journey, right?
Yeah.
I think we are extraordinarily fortunate at Lloyd's in Canada in that Lloyd's is highly thought of in Canada, and we have a lot of MGAs and brokers and cover holders who want to do business with Lloyd's, and we'll be eternally thankful for that. But we have to try and up our game every day and make transacting with Lloyd's as seamless and as painless as possible. Yeah. So we need to focus on that all the time. I want to focus on, at $6.1 billion annually, still finding ways to grow, responsibly, sustainably, right?
Yeah.
The idea about bringing entire new opportunities to the Canadian marketplace, like captives or multinational, right? Any Canadian business of a significant scale is an exporter, is a multinational.
We're an exporting
company,
nation,
right?
Yeah.
So why shouldn't Lloyd's be a leader in that kind of cross-border insurance placements and programs?
Agreed.
So I think there's lots of good runway for Lloyd's in Canada for the foreseeable future, and I just got to make sure that I get out of the way and let it all happen.
That's some things. You said a key word there in your initial statement, was making Lloyd's an easier place to do business with. That implies that that's a journey, and so I respect that language actually, because some people like it's like a destination, like we're now easy. No, it's like you always got to be working at it, and the world around you is evolving too, right? So
and there's certain requirements, certain standards that I don't think we are going to compromise on, right? I mean, it's not a race to the bottom. It's about doing things properly, right? Yeah. So so Lloyd's has one of the largest distribution networks in the world with all of our cover holders, right? And there's almost 300 of them in Canada, which is a huge number, really, when you think about the size of our economy and things.
Yeah.
And we hold them to standard. They represent Lloyd's, right? They're underwriting on behalf of Lloyd's. Yeah. They're using our name and brand, and we have some what we would consider reasonable baseline expectations of them. But our for instance, our audit process needs to become better and less obtrusive, and needs to focus on exactly what matters and stop asking questions 2 and 3 times about things that don't matter.
Right.
And it's just an example, but we need to have the discipline to keep on re-examining the way we do business, not assuming that it's right, that it's as good as it can be.
Right. That's very honest. I appreciate the answer.
Yeah. If I didn't say it, someone else would for me. So
yeah, it's better to just like call it out. Right. And, I think nobody has their whole house in order. Right.
Yeah.
But to hear that, Lloyd's has an awareness and that you're working on being better, that's the type of organization you want to be associated with. Any advice for we talked about labs and like we're very founder focused and we work with startups and we try to bring startups together with carriers, brokers, etc. Do you have any advice?
The only advice I would think of, I guess the one piece of advice that I would give, just based on I guess the 3 or 4 years where I've been more engaged in the community is people usually have really interest in technology, but they need to spend the time learning insurance as well.
Yeah.
Right. And I've at times been surprised by how little people really knew about the fundamentals of the industry that they're supposedly disrupting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That needs to be called out.
Right. So 100%. So I just think, I think it's part of
just
doing
say
your
insurance
homework.
Sucks and then, but not know.
And they have no idea about,
fundamentals. Yeah.
But they have no idea about sort of the regulatory constraints that apply.
And why it's regulated.
Right. So, so I think the most successful startups and insurtechs that I've seen have a really good balance of technology and insurance knowledge and skills. Right. And then those ones are the ones that usually, in my mind, really, they attract the smart money.
Sure. Yeah. And that's what you want. Strategic investment.
Right.
And strategic partners.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's partnership or money. I mean, but the people who can talk the talk and walk the walk are the ones that usually are much more successful.
Yeah. And you're going to be a more valuable long-term partner to the industry you're trying to sell into, like the carriers that you're trying to convert into customers. Ultimately, if you understand their problem and the pain points that you're trying to solve for, as opposed to just kind of pointing out the obvious. So that's great advice. I just went back to a bullet point that I written down earlier. I forgot to mention. You are involved. I can't remember the name. I think it starts with a V, an organization around young leaders or leaders that are trying to, or young people that are trying to do something in society. Is it Veritas or something like that? We talked about it in one of our phone calls.
Now you're stumping me. It doesn't make me a very good advocate.
Were you at, there was something that was in February, an event where I'll have to go back to my notes.
Michelle, what are we talking about here?
Is it like young entrepreneurs that are trying to
Enactus. Enactus. Sorry. All right.
So I was totally off with the V.
That's true.
Cut that out. Yeah. Okay. Enactus.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about them?
Because I love
the reason why I mention it. I'll just tell you, and I'll tee you up, and then you can talk about it. Is talking about insurance, how like we did in the beginning, and the role it plays in society. And we need to talk more about that. And I agree with you. But how, like, there's got to be an impetus to like get or catalyst to get people to the table and get the next generation interested in insurance, right? And I don't know if that's one mechanism, but
possibly. I mean, with these young entrepreneurs that are part of Enactus, I mean, I think our job is kind of to just enable them and get out of the way. They're that good. But yes,
right.
Absolutely. Lloyd's is a sponsor and supporter of Enactus here in Canada and sort of globally. And real quickly, Enactus is a global charitable organization that believes in, I guess, changing the world and social utility through entrepreneurialism.
Right.
And so universities and higher education institutions all around the world, students form teams and businesses, right? That have to be fully self-funding. They are a real business in every sense of the word with a strong social purpose or utility to them.
Right.
Right.
Got it.
And these ventures individually and collectively are going to change the world. And so they it takes them sometimes years to kind of start the business and grow it to kind of a reasonable scale, right? But they spend the time on top of their studies, on top of everything else they're doing, almost passing along the business through generation, right? Because they're graduating every 3 and 4 years. And they get together throughout the year, regionally in Canada first, and hold competitions. And the idea of, a pitch day and highlighting their business ventures is very much part of the DNA and fabric of Enactus. They believe, that kind of competition facilitates and spurs even better business ideas and more drive to succeed. And it gets to a national championship and then to a global championship.
Wow.
And I mean, it's just a fantastic organization. It's particularly fun because Canada always does really well too.
Oh yeah,
right?
I'd love to hear that.
Canadian student entrepreneurs are absolutely top notch. They come up with remarkable ideas every year, right? It's unfortunate that only one team gets to go to the World Championships, but that's how the rules work. This week, actually, Friday, I'll be there devoting some time. I'm going to the Central Canadian Championships to help judge and talk to some of the entrepreneurs. And,
that's great.
They say I'm going there to give advice. I think I'm just going to encourage because I don't think they need my advice. They're pretty exceptional, but it's a great organization.
Well, don't underestimate the impact that you can have, right? It might just be one thing that you say that gives someone that extra boost.
I will be passing out job applications.
Yeah, great idea. So what is their, are they a private enterprise or are they a nonprofit?
Non-for-profit, a charitable organization.
Canadian or international?
There's a Canadian chapter and globally. I mean, they have chapters all around the world.
Do you know where it got its origins? Or?
I believe the United States, I think. Okay. But I wouldn't quote me on that for sure. I think so.
No, and it's interesting because like the social enterprise side of it is really cool because using entrepreneurialism to achieve social goals. Right. Makes me really proud to be a capitalist, to be honest with you.
Well, we have our highlights and we have our lowlights. But the idea is that they're just not going to wait for anyone else. They're going to do it. And to do it themselves, they have to kind of be self-funding. And that sort of precipitates having a business model, right? And it's quite remarkable what they come up with, right? In terms of innovation and just business acumen and commitment. It's incredibly inspiring to watch, right? You leave feeling incredibly energized and also a little bit undeserving.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that. Well, you know what? Thanks for sharing about your involvement in that. And, I'd love to expose them to even some of the things that we're doing.
I'm sure that would be great.
Some opportunities there. So, Mark, thanks for sitting down with me today. Before we kind of wrap it up, were there any closing thoughts on anything we didn't get to talk about today? Or
no? Well, listen. I mean, it was a great conversation. I know you're a shy guy. I was just going to say, we could go on and on for hours about all things Lloyd's and otherwise. It's a real pleasure, right? Thank you for asking. It's great to talk a little bit about what Lloyd's is doing in the innovation space and otherwise. And we will be there as a strong supporter for all of the innovation efforts that InsurTech North is undertaking. We're proud to be part of it.
And we'll just cut that out at the end. InsurTech Canada.
I'm sorry.
We are
InsurTech,
no. We're aligned in InsurTech North.
So let's do it again. Let's do it again. Oh my goodness.
No. So just that last sentence. That's all.
Yeah. So listen, I mean, thank you for the time. You know, we're proud to be a supporter of InsurTech Canada.
Yeah.
Want to be there for all the events and lend whatever support we can.
Fantastic, Mark. Thank you.
Great.
It was a pleasure sitting down.
Thank you.
Thank you
Great.
so much. And maybe we'll get some Lloyd's coffee going.
Yeah, or something else in there, maybe now that we're done.
Fantastic.